You're listening to the Unwritable Rant podcast with your host and bourbon-soaked storyteller, Juliette Miranda.
Hey there, y'all. It's Juliette Miranda. Welcome to episode 247 of the Unwritable Rant podcast. I have a bourbon-soaked Christmas story for you about criminal caroling and a cooler of warm beer. But first, I'm sucking back some bourbon. Cheers, y'all. That is tasty bourbon, y'all. Now, before I get into the story, y'all, I just want to remind you that this is the last episode of the Unwritable Rant podcast for this year. I am taking a 2-week holiday break to refresh and renew and come back with all sorts of crazy new stories for y'all on January 10th. 2021. I have to admit, I'm excited to have a bit of a break because it has been crazy around here, y'all. We went to an ugly Christmas sweater party last weekend, and it was a blast. We're talking a small group of really cool people, and I have to say, I'm constantly surprised and kind of in love with just how welcoming everyone here in New Orleans has been when it comes to me and my guy. They've brought us into their homes like we're family. They've shared cocktails and food with us, and they're helping us learn all about the traditions of this incredible place. And I think what I love most is just how everything here is a celebration, especially the Christmas season. And the host of this party, she went all out and had a snow machine. It was amazing. Right around 9 o'clock or so, it clicked on, and the next thing we know, her entire courtyard is filled with dazzling, fluffy snow. This was something I never thought I would experience. I mean, for starters, there's my guy. He's decked out in a glaring red sweater with dozens of disembodied Santa heads floating around. And then there's the snow. It was the perfect kind of snow, and that would be the fake kind. But it made for a gorgeous sight as it kind of lingered on palm leaves and bricks before eventually vanishing. I feel like I've seen way too much snow in my lifetime, and rarely have I ever enjoyed it. In fact, I can think of one Christmas in particular where I very nearly would have traded all that snow for something like, sand fleas, or fire ants, or maybe even an avalanche of desert centipedes. Because that was the year I got talked into going caroling. The invitation came from a guy that I like to call Jackass. There's a name I haven't said in quite some time. Jackass. Fucking asshole. Why I dated him is anyone's guess. I suppose it was some deep-rooted combo of masochism and boredom, and the sex was pretty good. He was a shitty drummer in a shitty but disturbingly well-known band who happened to steal silverware from restaurants. He hit on all my friends and secretly laced my joints with cocaine just for funsies. He's also the same guy that I once threw a dead jellyfish at in Jamaica when I was gorgled on mushrooms. And if you want to hear those stories, they are all in the podcast archives. Jackass approached me with a caroling idea about a week before Christmas. We were at his shithole apartment on the south side of Chicago then, the one where empty egg cartons lined the walls to mask the sound of his drum kit. Tinfoil garland was tacked to the window frame in a sad stab at festivities, and the sole space heater burned away in the center of the room. Oh, it was so rank. Just rank and dirty. I hadn't intended on spending the night there, but snow kicked in that afternoon, and by 5 o'clock, had just blanketed the entire city in several inches of crap I didn't want to drive through. Ugh, snow is just the fucking worst. It really is. It's just a pain in the ass. It's cold. And I remember staring out the window as it fell, feeling anything but cozy. Mostly I just felt trapped, and I was doing my best to ease it by working on a very foul drunk. A PBR kind of drunk, which made me receptive but ornery. I didn't want to do anything, but I also didn't want to be there doing nothing. So, when Jackass suggested that we go caroling, I didn't shoot the idea down because apparently my nostalgic bent is buoyant enough to float in booze. He positioned caroling as being fun, which wasn't a word that Jackass used very often. His concerns typically leaned more toward things being lucrative or destructive, so I'm immediately suspicious. And of course, he won't own up to anything nefarious, and, well, I was too lazy to push the issue. I didn't really give a fuck, and I said as much, with one codicil. We weren't taking my car, and I wasn't driving anywhere. Jackass was always angling to use my car, and it was the one line I stood firm on. That car was my escape pod, whether from him or Chicago entirely, and I wasn't about to let him use it as a mule or wrap it around a traffic light. He agreed to my terms and left me to my beer and It's a Fucking Wonderful Life movie while he went into the back room to make some phone calls. The fact that he was making phone calls in private didn't concern me so much as the fact that when done, he started cleaning out the trunk of his car. I wasn't sure if this was a precaution or preparation. Either way, he spent a solid 20 minutes in the back alley, trudging through snow to carry several suitcases, a set of bagpipes, and what I'm pretty sure was a handsaw into the house. Just as he finished up, the doorbell rang. And within 30 minutes, the living room was full of Chicago's shadiest musicians and their chicks, all clad in scarves and Santa hats. It was highly unlikely that they were there in the spirit of Christmas cheer, which, quite honestly, I found so intriguing I couldn't bring myself to ruin their little game by asking too many questions. And on the surface, this really did seem to be a legit caroling party. 2 guys had brought guitars, and for the next hour, we practiced a few classic songs. We didn't get too fancy with harmonies or anything, especially seeing as how several of us were working on a fairly solid drunk, but we sounded passable enough to not get chased off anyone's lawn with a garden hose. Jackass and 2 of his buddies skipped the rehearsal and declined hits from one of the many thermoses of whiskey being passed around. Their excuse of being our designated drivers for the night was reasonable enough, I suppose. Yet as we all packed into their 3 cars, I couldn't shake the feeling that something naughty was about to go down. Our destination was the north side of the city, and this, y'all, is totally John Hughes territory. You know, where the houses are impressively large and the residents are less inclined to be gun owners. After exiting the highway, our allegedly merry little caravan found an idyllic, not quite gated community, and we pulled onto a street lined with houses just erupting with Christmas lights and decorations. We pile out of the car and, with the 2 minstrel guitar players leading the way, march up to a front porch for our first performance. We Wish You a Merry Christmas was our opener, and as the words poured from our mouths, I had to admit we sounded better than we should have. When you see carolers in the movies, they're always decked out in old-timey clothing. They over-enunciate, which makes their cheeks look all the more rosy. And there's generally a sense of charity to the group. Yeah, my group didn't have that. We looked disorderly at best. A few of the girlfriends had slutty Santa outfits on, while the guys were a little more low-key with Megadeth patches and denim, and then Santa hats. I did not have a Santa hat or a slutty Santa suit, but I did wrap a garland noose around my neck. It was about as much merriness as I could muster that day. But I'll tell you, although we did not look the part, having professional musicians to round out our crazy choir made all of the difference. We really sounded good. So good that after a small crowd gathered outside to listen in the chilly evening air, one very generous family invited us all into their living room for hot chocolate and more songs. We assemble around the fireplace like it's a fucking Christmas card. Now I'm in the back and off to the side to ensure that no one gets a real good look at me, because I'm pretty sure these folks, they would be less generous with their space if they knew just how hammered I was. I was hovering dangerously close to losing it, and I probably even should have gone back to the car to sleep it off. I mean, I'd been drinking steadily since around noon, partly to make Jackass more tolerable, but mostly just to block the entire suckage of spending a jobless and friendless Christmas in Chicago. With every joyful lyric we sang, the more depressed and lonely I felt. I didn't know any of these people. All I knew was Jackass, and the thought of having to go back to his dirty house and sleep on his floor mattress, well, it didn't exactly fill me with goodwill. And speaking of Jackass, where the fuck did he go? I'd lost track of the guy before we moved inside. My eyes are blurry as I try to scan the room. I count 4 makeshift carolers, 3 sexy Santas, and 2 wandering minstrels, but no Jackass or his scrappy counterparts. None of my crew seems concerned about their absence. They just continue to lead the room in song after song. So I'm about to shrug it off, but then movement outside catches my eye. At first, I think it's someone's dog or maybe another neighbor. So I squint to focus my boozy vision, and what to my wondering eyes should appear but fucking Jackass. He has swapped his Santa hat for a ski mask and has his arms full of what appears to be an assortment of power tools. Hot on his heels are his 2 dickhead friends, both of whom are loaded up with stuff that does not belong to them. The trio heads toward the cars to deposit their goodies in the trunks, then quickly vanish behind another house. Oh, fucking hell. Nothing has ever sobered up my drunk so quickly as the realization that I'm officially a real-life Grinch. Not a figurative one, but a legit thieving Grinch. Because this is no peaceful caroling mission that I am on. This is a hobo bling ring. Me and my criminal carolers are just a distraction to allow Jackass to pillage the whole goddamn neighborhood. And oh my God, it was all too easy. Most of the neighbors were gathered in the living room with us, and pretty much all of them had left their garage doors open. Instead of spelling out Merry Christmas, the house lights may as well have just read, "Come on in." So I'm standing there and I'm singing and I'm trying to process this because I'm wondering, am I the only idiot who wasn't in on this scheme? Because the others are singing like everything is fine. And I'm kind of left with a moral dilemma. Maybe not moral exactly, because let's face it, my morals back then hovered just shy of subterranean. And to be completely honest, I was a little impressed. It wasn't often that a guy like Jackass had a successful scheme, and part of me wanted to applaud the guy for pulling it off. He may not have deserved Christmas cheer, but in a perverse way, he'd kind of earned it. And this was my reasoning for keeping my mouth shut as Jackass continues his reverse gifting. Well, that and the fact that I was far more afraid of what he and his friends would do to me for ratting them out than I was of getting caught. Oh, don't get me wrong, I felt horrible about what was happening to these nice but naive people. But this wasn't the time for feelings. No, this was a time for self-preservation. The 2 minstrels were doing a little impromptu guitar riffing during Jingle Bell Rock, which gave me the chance to make my way toward the front of the group. This was the last song in our repertoire, and I wanted to make sure I was good and close to the front door when it came time to leave. We wrap it up with a flourish, and the room fills with applause. There's handshaking and compliments and invitations to stay for dessert, but I want none of that. And it's pretty clear the others are getting a little bit twitchy, too. Instead, we all file out, waving politely and trying not to walk too quickly as we make our way back down the block. Once we hit the end of the street, we discover that only 2 of the 3 cars we'd come in had the lights on and motors running. Not surprisingly, the dark car belongs to Jackass. Where his 2 friends had wrapped things up as planned, Jackass had gotten greedy and gone back to snag a very large space heater. We see him lumbering in the distance, arms wrapped around the heater and trying desperately to catch up. The heater's too bulky for Jackass to run. He could only kind of wobble from foot to foot, and in his attempt to pick up the pace, he gets caught up in a web of lights in the bushes alongside of the house. He stumbles, and the space heater is the first thing to go down, followed by a plastic snowman that Jackass knocks into as he tries to shake free from the cables. He only manages to make things worse, though, and in his panic decides his best option is just to make a break for it. He tears forward, and with him come the lights. All the multicolor lights, still lit for the moment, and ripped from the bushes one by one as Jackass runs. By now, the neighbors are spilling outside. They've been alerted to our deception by the festive Technicolor trail Jackass was leaving right back to the scene of the crime. Something finally snaps, whether it was a cable or maybe his luck, and Jackass plunges forward, landing face first in the street. Someone yells that the police are on the way, and that is more than enough to get Jackass back on his feet. He's missing a tooth now and bleeding from the nose, and as I watch him make his bloody dash toward his car, for the first time that whole holiday, I felt myself smiling. God, I hated that guy. He was such a fucking idiot. As for me, I'm safely tucked into his friend's car and watching Jackass from the back window as we pull away. Self-preservation is everything, y'all. His friends had zero intention of waiting around for him, and I was just fine with that. Later that night, we reconvened at a 24-hour White Castle back on the south side, Jackass included. His face was mangled, but he'd managed to get away before the cops got there. Everyone is anxious to check out the loot, so the guys pop the trunks and we all gather around for the big reveal. And then there's silence. I don't really know what these people were expecting. Some stereo equipment, maybe a video game system or two. I guess anything to make their Christmases a little easier. Unfortunately, that just wasn't in the trunks. Since most of the house doors were locked, the guys were left to pilfer what they could from the open garages and tool sheds. All told, they walked away with 2 snow tires, a couple electric drills, a bunch of gardening tools, and a cooler of warm beer. It was the most pathetic haul of stolen goods I'd ever seen. Not that I'm usually privy to stolen anything. Still, the disappointment on everyone was very obvious, and of all things, that kind of made me sad. I still didn't know these people. I mean, hell, I didn't even like them. But I knew they weren't criminals any more than I was. They were just trying to get by that Christmas, and like me, had made some questionable decisions on how to do that. I rummage around through my pockets and I find $30. It was all the money I had in the world, but at White Castle it was considered a small fortune. So I tell everyone to stay put and I run inside, where I purchase several sacks of sliders, 10 cartons of greasy fries, and I even convince the chick at the counter to let me run them out of ice. Oh, we feasted there in that parking lot that night. And even though the ill-gotten beer never got quite cold, it was just enough to brighten everyone's mood. Because, y'all, everyone deserves a little Christmas spirit. Even a group of not quite criminals. Cheers, y'all. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Unwritable Rant podcast. If you get lonely these next 2 weeks while I am on holiday break, just head to theunwritablerant.com and you can find the entire back catalog of this podcast. Or join me on YouTube. That's youtube.com/Juliette Miranda. Every Monday night, I go live at 7 p.m. Central with Bourbon-soaked Live, where I do bourbon reviews and I hang out and talk with people in the chat. It's always a great time, and there are always cool people there to talk to. So come on over and join us. And of course, y'all, I hope you have a very, very happy holiday and an excellent new year. I know we all deserve one. I'll be back on January 10th. Until then, cheers, y'all.
Go to theunwritablерant.com and sign up to get early access to interviews and new videos. And don't forget to connect with Juliette on Twitter at Morning Neurosis.
Girl, you was pretty as a Sunday morning, standing on the corner at Carondelet. What you say we make our way up to Bourbon, a couple hurricanes and a hand grenade, and get blown away. Let the chips fall where they may. If it's all the same, what you say, bon ton, hey, pretty mama, I can smell the gumbo. Sweetest taste of honeysuckle on my lips. Good God Almighty, I can hear the trombone. Every heart ought to beat to a rhythm like this. Come a little closer, honey, let me hold you. Nothing tastes better than a bourbon kiss. You